Hey there, my fellow music lovers. Welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for dropping by. And in this video, I wanted to talk about the 90s for a little bit. I did this video not too long ago about hair bands, and it was really more about trends and how, back in the 80s, you had these bands that kind of set the trend, kind of set the table up for hair metal. And then you had the copycats, and before you knew it, the whole thing just kind of imploded on itself. And the same thing happened in the 90s with grunge. You had your Nirvana and Pearl Jam and bands like that. And then before you know it, there were these copycat bands. Everything just kind of got so boring and stale. It kind of collapsed. And I didn't want to let the 90s go without talking about some good bands that actually came out of the 90s that I don't think subscribed to the fads and to the trends. And they kind of had their own thing going on. Bands that I used to listen to quite a bit. Some of them maybe I still do. Some of them maybe I just kind of got burned out on them or just don't feel like they're really doing much now that I really care about. But still, I think the 90s had some really cool bands. And I want to hear what you think too. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put up a poll. I'm going to have you vote. I want to hear what some of your favorite bands are. And maybe we'll do a battle of the bands kind of thing if this video really takes off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break up my top 10 list into two sets of 5 because I don't think the YouTube poll allows you to vote for more than 5 things at any one given time. So you're going to do my bottom 5 and then I'll get you to vote on my top 5. Okay, so I want you to be thinking about yours because I'm also going to have you in the comments below list your favorite bands, and then in another video we'll vote on yours. Okay, so anyway, let me first get started with this. I'm going to throw another wrench into it. I've got some honorable mentions before I get to my top 10 list. These are bands that I also liked that didn't make my top 10 list for the best 90s bands. Okay, so here we go. Here are my top 5 honorable mentions for the 90s. Okay, number 5 is going to be Fish. Always thought they were pretty cool. They were like a jam band from the 90s. I'm sure that you guys have heard them, and I don't know what you think about them. To me, the whole jam band scene, I kind of liked it because we got back to this improvisational, expanded kind of a format that we had in the 70s with prog rock. It was almost like, prog rock was like reinvented or reincarnated, I should probably say. It's almost like, Kermit the Prog or something. But I always thought that Fish and other bands like them just kind of opened things up a bit. There was a lot more experimentation. And of course, there was the soaking up of different genres. You had little bits of jazz, little bits of blues and folk and rock and maybe classical music. And there were just these different elements. And you could have a band go on for 20 minutes. And sometimes it was an improvisational piece. And I just really enjoyed that about the 90s because there were quite a few bands that went into that kind of direction. And so I really do appreciate Fish for that. And I really liked their first few albums. But I think Fish is one of these bands that, you got to see them live. Kind of like the Grateful Dead. Their stuff that they did in the studio was kind of cool, but really to get the experience, you have to see them live, hear them live. That's where they really shine, is as a live act. Okay, number 4 on my list, speaking of live, is the band Live. I really did like them too. Not as much as the other bands that are going to be in my top 10, but I did like stuff from like the Throwing Copper album. I think they put out, the first 2 or 3 albums I thought had some really cool stuff on it. Then after a while, I kind of tuned out. Ed Kwasik left the band eventually. He's now back in. I think they just put out a new album or it's going to be coming out soon. But anyway, I thought Live was a really cool band. Number 3, Alice in Chains. I really like them too. They are the band that kind of, in my opinion, really kind of kicked off this whole grunge rock scene. They were a band that came on the scene in 1990, very gritty, hard sounds that kind of upended a lot of the stuff that was going on in the latter part of the 80s. Number 2 on my list here is going to be Collective Soul. And that's a band that I actually didn't really care for when they first came out. You may remember their first song was this one called Shine. And I started working in like album rock radio when this song came out and everybody was calling in for it. And I got sick of playing it and every other word in that song was like, yeah. And I didn't really care for it. But as they kept putting albums out, I really could see that they were growing, and Ed Roland has a really good sense of melodies, really good songwriter, and I really got to like Collective Soul. Something like The World I Know, I think, is a beautiful song. And they have a lot of other good songs, a lot of good riffs. Some people have left that band over the years. I don't think they're as good as they used to be, but in the 90s, I really did dig them. And then number one on my bubbling under list has got to be Soundgarden. I think that, you know, they were just a really cool band. Almost made my top 10 list. Such a shame that we lost Chris Cornell recently. That was such a tragedy. But Soundgarden has got some really good stuff. So let me know of these five which you like. I'm going to put a poll up, all right? Fish, Live, Alice in Chains, Collective Soul, or Soundgarden. Which one do you think is the best out of that five? Go vote now, okay? So let's get to the top 10. All right, so number 10 on my list of top 10 bands of the 90s is going to be Cake. I really dig this band, Cake. They came out, I think it was around the mid-90s or so, and it's a very, very clever band, you know, very dry sense of humor. The lead singer, I can't remember his name, very dry. He's got a very, like, almost a monotone vocal, but a very, very talented band. I just like how they incorporated a lot of different flavors. Always love stuff like, of course, The Distance, Never There, Long Skirt, Short Jacket is great. And they've got a bunch of other songs, too, that really, really cool. So Cake would have to be number 10 on my list. Number 9 is going to be Blues Traveler. Now, Blues Traveler is a band that I really got into early on, and then I kind of got away from them after a while. But if you're really into like prog rock and you really like jammy kind of stuff, then check out the first couple of Blues Travelers albums, especially their first album, second album too, Travelers and Thieves. They were a blues band, they were a hard rock blues band, and they incorporated some real, dare I say, proggy kind of elements. A lot of time changes, very complicated stuff going on, but yet they were doing it in shorter songs. I've seen them live a couple of times, and they're another one of these bands, kind of like Fish, where they could do a 10-minute song and just kind of go off and improvise and just jam. And you know, John Popper is an amazing player, harmonica player. Kind of reminds me, he's like what he is to the harmonica, like Ian Anderson is to the flute. Like, you know, I could definitely see people saying, oh, I can't stand Popper and his damn harmonica, just like people can't stand the flute in Tull. But I really do love Blues Traveler, especially the earlier albums. All right, so number 8 on my list is going to be Primus. And, you know, this is a band that a lot of people tend to hate, especially because of Les Claypool's voice. You know, he has one of these voices that, and, you know, like one of these vocals that kind of can get on your nerves. You either love them or you hate them. And I really do like Primus's 90s output. After the 90s, things went downhill for them. But in my opinion, I think that their music just kind of got really unfocused and plodding, and I really didn't care for it a whole lot. But, you know, you look at the first album, Frizzle Fry is really good, Sailing the Seas of Cheese, you know, with like Tommy the Cat and Jerry Was a Race Car Driver, and then you get into like My Name is Mud, and their 99 album, Anti-Pop, I thought was a really good album, actually. And I think that Primus has had their time. And you got to really be in the mood to listen to them, but there's some really cool stuff in there. I remember when I was in radio once, I threw on Tommy the Cat. It was not in the playlist. I often did that. I, you know, would see a playlist, and then the first thing I would think of is, okay, where can I put in the music that I want to hear? And I would throw a song in every now and then that was kind of like off the beaten path. I put in Tommy the Cat, and the phones lit up. People were like, what the hell is that? That's really awesome. Play more of that. And of course, I really couldn't because the station wasn't really into Primus, but just goes to show you how the song like that really grabbed people. And I think it's their best song, actually. Number 7 on my list is Lenny Kravitz. Always did love Lenny. I did a whole video about him. He's got a new album coming out very, very soon. You know, he's just got, I always found that he's just got this great blend of rock and soul and blues and R&B and everything. And he's been pretty solid throughout his entire career. You know, it's, you know, not every album that he puts out is a blockbuster, but usually there's a few things on every album that kind of stick. And I think he's about due for another greatest hits album. He could easily put out a 2 CD greatest hits or something. He's very solid. He's got a lot of good stuff. You know, Are You Gonna Go My Way, Tunnel Vision. He just put this album out last, well, a couple years back. A song called The Chamber is really good. Believe in Me is another good song. I've got a playlist actually that I'm gonna link to below with my top 5 favorite songs from each of these artists that are in the top 10. So you can check that out if you want to sample any of these guys. But yeah, always did love Lenny. Number 6 is going to be the Dave Matthews Band. The Dave Matthews Band I'm a little bit partial to because they got their start in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is right up the road, not too far from me. And so I was very much, you know, I was listening to them before they broke. They used to play the local clubs here. A very, very popular band around here, and it was really cool to watch them get signed to RCA and then blow up. And it was kind of strange, you know, seeing the masses, the mainstream, love them. I remember when I was in radio, I played What Would You Say, which was the first song that was released from their Under the Table and Dreaming album. And the Dave Matthews Band was like a light in the darkness because at this time in the early, well, it was around the mid-90s, around 94, you know, there was a lot of the harder-edged grunge stuff going on, a lot of the angry, you know, want to shoot myself kind of stuff. And the Dave Matthews Band came in with the horns and the violin and acoustic guitar. They didn't have any electric guitars at all. And the phones lit up. People were dying for this kind of music. And the Dave Matthews, they just kind of exploded. And as they kept putting albums out, you could hear they were becoming more and more streamlined. And their songs were more pop oriented. And the diehard fans from like around here were kind of getting pissed off because they're a local band that was doing, you know, because the Dave Matthews Band used to do a lot more, they still do a lot of jammy stuff, but, you know, their songs weren't quite as well crafted when they were just a local band. And so when the locals started hearing them putting out these polished pop songs, it was kind of, you know, almost like a bittersweet kind of thing. But you flip it around and the mainstream was hungry for this kind of music. It was weird seeing that kind of thing go on, but always did love them, especially early on. Last few albums I really haven't cared much about, but I really loved their first few albums. And really their first few albums were filled with songs that they had been woodshedding in the clubs for many, many years, like Ants Marching and you know, Tripping Billies, and there are a bunch of other songs too that they have been playing for many, many years. Finally put them on a studio album. So always did find those earlier albums from the Dave Matthews Band really, really good. So anyway, I'm going to take a poll right now of these first 5, which is your favorite, okay? Cake, Blues Traveler, Primus, Lenny Kravitz, or the Dave Matthews Band. I want you to vote and let me know which of those 5 is your favorite from the 90s. All right, so on to the top 5 bands, my favorites from the 90s. Number 5 is going to be Beck. And when he first came out, I hated him. I thought he was, who is this twerp dork? He came out with this song called Loser, and I thought it was very fitting at that time. I didn't like it at all. But then he came out with this album called Odelay with like Where It's At and New Pollution and Devil's Haircut, and that caught my eye and my ear. I thought he was really creative and inventive, and I really loved how he crafted that album. And he's an artist actually that I think got better as he kept going. And in the 2000s, I thought he put out some really good stuff. He put out this album called Guero. That was really, really good. That's my favorite Beck album. And he just put this album out recently that I thought had some really good stuff on it, like Up All Night's a cool song, and Dreams. So Beck, I think, you know, and he has had his periods where he's done some real downer stuff, like I Want to Hang Myself kind of music, like I think it was like Morning Phase or something like that that he put out, where it's just like acoustical kind of, woe is me. I'm not into that stuff. I'm into his quirky, upbeat, pop oriented, where he's fusing jazz and rock and hip hop and R&B and all soul music. And I love that experimental Beck. So yeah, I've really enjoyed listening to Beck, and I look forward to hearing more from him actually. All right, so number 4 on my list is Toad the Wet Sprocket. You may recall they were very popular in the early part of the 90s. They had these songs like Walk on the Ocean and All I Want. And then they kind of fell off the map in terms of popularity, but really they were still putting out some really quality stuff, even if it wasn't getting on the radio a whole lot. And they may have gone away for a little bit, but they came back not too long ago. They put an album out recently called New Constellation, which I thought was really good, actually, one of their best albums. Always loved, Glenn Phillips' voice, his songwriting, the melodies, the harmonies. Very, very strong, very solid band. Always enjoyed them. So I would definitely check out their stuff. Also, number 3 on my list of top 10 bands from the 90s is going to be the Ben Folds 5. Always loved the Ben Folds 5. To me, if you took a blender and you threw in like Billy Joel, Elton John, Steely Dan, maybe a little bit of Queen, a little bit of Beach Boys, maybe just a dash of ELO, and you blended it up, that would be the Ben Folds 5. They have a good sense of humor, very, very talented trio. The bass player, Robert Sledge, makes really good use of his bass. I mean, he gets these sounds out of his bass, and it almost sounds like they've got a guitar player there. But yeah, the Ben Folds 5 always did love their sense of humor and their approach to just crafting these really unique, quirky, kind of hooky pop rock songs. All right, number 2 on my list is going to be the Stone Temple Pilots. And I would have to say, of any of the bands that were considered to be kind of grunge or grunge-like from the early part of the 90s, Stone Temple Pilots were my favorite. Yeah, I liked Nirvana. I liked Soundgarden, Pearl Jam. I really wasn't that crazy about them. Alice in Chains, I also liked them. But for me, the Stone Temple Pilots kind of brought in some of the stuff that I loved from the 60s and 70s. There were elements of, like the Beatles and the Stones, and even like MC5 and some of those other bands that I found creeping their way into the Stone Temple Pilots. The Stone Temple Pilots were not just a grunge band. They had a lot more depth. And I like what Scott Weiland brought into that band, and it's a shame that they lost him. It's a shame that we lost him, that it's never going to happen again. It's so tragic. The Stone Temple Pilots are just not the same without Scott. I did a whole video about that. It was one of the first videos I ever made. I don't think anybody's even seen it. I'll put a link up to it. They have this new singer, Jeff Goot, and he does a good job. He definitely sounds like Scott Weiland in a lot of ways, but they're missing Scott's songwriting. They're missing that element that you have to have. But they did put out some really, really good stuff. The first album, Core, Purple, one of my favorite albums of all time, let alone STP albums. Interstate Love Song, song called Sour Girl from the 4th album. Really, really good stuff. All right, now the number 1 band of the 90s, in my opinion, are the Foo Fighters. Band that kind of came out of the ashes of Nirvana, one of the biggest bands of the 90s. If you had told me that the drummer of that band, Dave Grohl, was going to go on to rule the world and have one of the biggest bands ever and be one of the coolest dudes, I would have been like, are you kidding me? That quiet guy behind the drums, behind Kurt, is going to be even bigger than what I'm seeing here. And yeah, I mean, I've done some videos about the Foos and about Dave. Not too many people have watched them. I don't know why. I think the Foo Fighters are one of the last great bands that we're going to see, actually. They're one of these bands that they approach the level of, I think, some of the best bands that we've got from the 70s, from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Bands that can kind of reach across age groups and across cultures and generations. And Dave Grohl does such a good job of keeping the Foos right in front. He doesn't stay on the scene for too long. He knows when to get away because there's burnout. He knows, exactly how to keep everything fresh and exciting. He just did a 20-minute instrumental that he performed by himself called Play. I'm going to put a link up. I did a video about that, which was just fascinating. You know, the first Foo Fighters album that he ever did was just him. He played every single instrument. You know, he had to get out from the drum set of Nirvana and behind the scenes and to go in front of the scenes. And that didn't happen overnight. He had to build up his confidence in terms of writing songs and singing songs and getting in front of the microphone and performing and getting a band in place and all that. I mean, the guy has done amazing stuff. He's kind of, it's been like stepping stones and building blocks. And for him to be where he is now is just incredible. And plus, the Foo Fighters have a very solid catalog. Practically every album that they've put out has got something on it that is memorable, that is really, really great. My favorite Foo's album has got to be Sonic Highways. I loved how they did a documentary for every song, you know, for every city that that song was written for. You got to see the whole Sound City, not Sound City, the whole Sonic Highways documentary and everything that was on HBO. Go check that out. But yeah, Sound City is another thing. Sound City was a documentary that Dave Grohl made about a studio. He's a filmmaker too, on top of everything that I just said. So anyway, Foo Fighters are my #1 favorite band of the 90s. Like I said, I got a playlist down below so you can check out also my top 5 songs from each of these bands. And I also want you to vote on the top 5. So we're looking at Beck, Toad the Wet Sprocket, Ben Folds 5, Stone Temple Pilots, or the Foo Fighters. Which is your favorite from that list? I want you to vote in the poll now. And like I said, check out the playlist and put in the comments below what your top 5 or top 10, or just drop a name in there. And I'm going to see which ones are the most popular. I'll do a top 5 or top 10 list on those bands in another video, and we'll do some more voting, and maybe we'll have a little battle of the bands here, all right? So give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Be sure to hit the subscribe button too, and I'll check you later.